You bring lunch from home most days, a thermos, sometimes leftovers in a container that has seen better days. Your desk is the same desk it was 3 years ago. You did not ask for a standing version. You did not put in for a second monitor. Your car is in the fourth row of the parking structure, the same spot, because you arrive at the same time, because nothing about the way you move through this building suggests anything other than a person who is managing carefully on a salary. Your coworkers have formed a picture of you. It is not a cruel picture. It is just the one the available data supports. You pack lunch. You do not talk about vacations. You drove the same car to the holiday party that you drove to the first day of onboarding. When the group goes out for someone's birthday, you order the second cheapest thing on the menu and you split the check evenly. You are, by every visible signal, a person who is being careful with money because there is a specific amount of it and it requires care. Last year, 14 businesses deposited a combined $1.7 million into accounts with your name on them. That number is not revenue. Revenue is what came in before costs, before payroll for the people who actually run the operations day to day, before insurance and licensing and the quiet friction of keeping 14 separate things operational. Revenue is a much larger number and it belongs on a different line. The $1.7 million is what remained after all of that. It is the number that transferred, cleared, and settled. It is take home in the most literal sense of the word. It went home. Your coworkers, including the one who mentioned last Tuesday that she had been looking at refinancing options, have no idea it exists. This is not a deception, it is a structure. And understanding the difference between those two things is where this starts. The assumptions people make about money have almost nothing to do with money. They are made from signals, the car, the lunch, the way you answer the question, what did you do this weekend? The brand of headphones on your desk, the shoes. These are the data points your colleagues are running through an informal and entirely unconscious model. And the output of that model is a number, a rough bracket, an impression of where you probably fall. They are not wrong to run the model. Everyone runs it. They are just working with incomplete inputs and drawing a conclusion that happens to be significantly off. 14 businesses, that is the actual input they are missing. Not 14 in the sense of 14 logos and 14 conference rooms and 14 sets of business cards you carry in a special wallet. 14 in the sense of 14 income-producing operations that require coordination and attention and occasional problem-solving, but do not require you to be present inside them most hours of most days. The mix is intentional. Some are service businesses. Local operations with recurring customers and low physical footprint, the kind of business that exists in every mid-sized city and never makes a headline. Some run on contracts, monthly agreements with clients who have no particular incentive to leave because switching costs are real and the service works. Some are asset-light, some own the equipment they use. None of them are interesting in the way that draws attention. That is the design. Boring is not an accident. Boring is a selection criterion. A business that nobody is excited about is a business that nobody is trying to disrupt. The categories that attract venture capital and founder energy and breathless coverage are categories in motion. They are being redrawn constantly. The businesses in this portfolio are not in motion. They are in place. They serve a need that existed before anyone was paying attention and will exist after everyone stops. Boring creates defensibility in a way that exciting rarely does. You are not competing with a startup that raised $40 million to own your market. You are in a market where the $40 million startup does not see a $40 million opportunity. That asymmetry is the point. The 14 are not identical. A portfolio of identical businesses is a portfolio of identical risk, which defeats the purpose of holding multiple positions. These span enough variation in geography, customer type, and revenue structure that a single disruption does not touch all of them simultaneously. Some have 3 or 4 employees. Some have more. None of them have a founder who shows up to stand-up meetings and answers Slack messages at 11 p.m. That founder does not exist in this model. What exists instead are operators. Managers. People who were hired specifically because they do not need someone looking over their shoulder and who are compensated in a way that makes staying and performing the obvious choice. The constraint that never appears in any income statement is the job. Showing up. Being present. Answering emails from Carla or whoever your Carla is with the same turnaround time as someone for whom this paycheck is the entire picture. The job is not a cover in some cinematic sense. It is just the job. It serves a function, benefits, a social structure, a reason to be somewhere during hours when the businesses are being run by the people hired to run them. But it creates a specific kind of pressure, which is the pressure to be indistinguishable. To not become the person who fields calls in the parking garage or steps out of the team meeting to handle something that no one in the team meeting can be told about. The job requires a version of you that has not yet been explained by a different income source. You maintain that version. It takes less effort than it sounds like it would. The question this raises is not whether this is possible. The portfolio exists. The deposit's clear. The take-home is a documented number and it belongs to a real person in a real office with a thermos and a car in the fourth row. The question is whether it is repeatable. Whether the process that assembled 14 boring businesses into a $1.7 million annual cash flow machine has structure underneath it, or whether it is a sequence of fortunate accidents dressed up in retrospect as a strategy. Whether someone else, starting from a different point with different resources, could build a different version of the same thing and arrive somewhere in the same neighborhood. That is what the rest of this covers, slowly, with the actual numbers. The 14 are not exotic. Start with what they look like before you look at what they do. A commercial cleaning company with 12 contracted accounts, all office buildings, all on monthly agreements, all renewing at the same rate they enrolled at because no office manager wants to spend 45 minutes interviewing a replacement vendor for a service that is currently working. A pest control route in a mid-sized metro, 73 residential customers on quarterly service plans, the kind of business where the truck shows up, the technician does the work, the card on file gets charged, and the customer does not think about it again until the truck shows up next quarter. A small HVAC maintenance company that does not do installations. Only service contracts. Only the unglamorous back half of the industry where the margins are steadier and the emergency calls come from the same buildings that signed agreements 2 years ago. Those are 3 of the 14. The pattern is legible. The category name that financial writers use for this is boring businesses. The category name that operators use is different. They call them route models or B2B service businesses or maintenance-based operations, and the distinction matters because it points at the mechanism. These businesses do not acquire a customer once and then sell them something new. They acquire a customer once and then collect from that customer on a schedule, sometimes forever, because the switching cost is real. Because the thing they provide is necessary in a low-drama way. Because the kind of person who runs the accounts receivable for a 12-person law firm does not want to spend her Tuesday mornings finding a new cleaning service. The status quo is the product. Inertia is the revenue model. What makes a business a good portfolio candidate is a short list once you understand it. Recurring demand, meaning the customer needs this again whether they want to or not. Simple operations, meaning the delivery of the service does not depend on a genius or a charismatic founder or an irreplaceable employee. Low churn, meaning the customer who signed last year is almost certainly the customer who will pay next year. And pricing power, meaning when costs go up, the price can follow without losing the account. Because the account has no practical alternative, it is willing to actually pursue. Businesses with all 4 of those qualities do not make headlines. They make deposits. The role of geography in this is underappreciated. Several of these 14 operate in what economists would call local monopoly conditions. Not monopoly in the legal sense, in the practical sense. There are 3 commercial pest control companies in a particular regional market. 2 of them have reputations. 1 of them is yours. The customer in that market is not choosing from a national menu. They are choosing from what exists within a reasonable service radius, and what exists is limited, and you are already in their building. That is a structural position that a software company cannot easily enter, and an out-of-state competitor cannot easily disrupt. The unsexy industries are often unsexy precisely because they are local, physical, and relationship dependent. Those properties look like limitations from the outside. From the inside, they are a moat. The deals that assembled this portfolio follow 3 recurring archetypes. The first is buying a stable operator. A business that has run correctly for years, has a manager who knows the operation, and has an owner who is ready to exit. The business does not need to be transformed. It needs to be maintained and gradually optimized. The second is buying a small competitor to an existing portfolio company, folding the accounts into the existing operation and capturing the margin that was previously split between 2 overhead structures. The third is the neglected asset, a business that has the right customers and the wrong management. Low prices it has never raised. Routes it has never optimized. A website that has not been updated since the Obama administration. The underlying demand is solid. Everything built around it is tired. You clean it up. You raise the prices. You find out whether the customers leave. Most of them do not leave. The numbers that matter when you evaluate any of these are specific. Seller's discretionary earnings is the number you start with. Not revenue. SDE. The actual economic benefit to an owner-operator before debt service and before any adjustments that exist because the business belongs to someone who also runs it. True owner hours comes next because SDE means one thing if the business requires 60 hours a week and a different thing if it requires 8. And customer concentration is the question you ask before any other question because a business with 70 clients where one client represents 40% of revenue is a business with one client and 69 placeholders. One departure restructures the entire investment. Across 14 businesses, the portfolio's risk profile is not 14 separate risks. It is a managed map. Some of these businesses are seasonal. Lawn care and HVAC service work differently in January than in July. The portfolio is constructed so that seasonality in one direction is offset by a business whose demand runs counter. Some businesses carry key person risk, a technician who knows every account, a manager who carries relationships that are not formally documented. Those risks are identified at acquisition and addressed with contracts, with redundancy, and occasionally with equity participation that changes the incentive structure for the person the business cannot afford to lose. The social invisibility of all of this is not incidental. A person who owns a piece of a commercial cleaning company does not arrive at parties with a story. There is no product to explain, no vision to pitch, no disruption to describe. The business exists in a category that people immediately understand and immediately stop thinking about. You mention it once, the conversation moves on. The deposits do not move on. They continue arriving, quietly and on schedule, into accounts that have your name on them, from businesses that have no idea you also pack lunch and park in the fourth row. The question everyone asks is some version of, but what do you actually do? The honest answer is that the answer changed. In the first year of owning any of these businesses, you do quite a lot. You learn the operation. You meet the accounts. You understand where the money leaks and who is carrying more than their title suggests and what would break first if the wrong person left on a Friday. You are not passive. You are studying. There is a difference between being present and being necessary, and the entire project is to move from the first category to the second as quickly as the business allows. The operating system that makes the exit from necessity possible is not complicated. It is three things applied consistently. Managers who own outcomes, not just tasks. Standard operating procedures that live in a shared document, not in someone's memory. And weekly scorecards that tell you in 4 numbers whether the business is performing or drifting. The scorecard for the pest control route is not a financial statement. It is 4 lines. Stops completed. Callbacks received. Accounts renewed this month. Accounts at risk of non-renewal. You read it on Tuesday morning. It takes 7 minutes. If everything is inside the expected range, you move on. If something is outside the range, you ask one question. The manager answers. You decide together whether it requires action or monitoring. This is not micromanagement. This is the opposite of micromanagement. Micromanagement fills the space where process does not exist. The scorecard replaces the need to call and ask how things are going. Things are going the way the scorecard says they are going. Hiring in these industries follows a different logic than hiring in industries that compete on prestige. The pest technician and the cleaning crew supervisor and the HVAC service coordinator are not applying to your business because it appeared in a trade publication. They are applying because you pay on time, you communicate clearly, you have written down what you expect, and people who work for you do not routinely get surprised by policy changes delivered at the end of a shift. That is a low bar. An embarrassing percentage of small businesses in these categories cannot clear it. You clear it. Respectful culture in a field service business is not a mission statement on the wall. It is the manager returning calls the same day. It is the pay structure that rewards tenure because replacing a technician who knows 70 residential accounts is not a recoverable event you want to experience more than once. It is the expectation written down so that a new hire knows what good performance looks like before they find out accidentally. Turnover in a route-based business is not just an HR problem. It is an operations problem and a revenue problem and occasionally a client relationship problem. Retention is part of the financial model. The financial controls are simple by design. Each business maintains its own operating account. Revenue flows in. Payroll, vendor payments, and supplies flow out. Distributions flow to the holding entity on a schedule. No commingling, no informal transfers, no reimbursements that skip the approval process. Anything above a defined threshold, the number is set per business based on its size and operating costs, requires a second signature or a documented approval before a check is cut. This is not because you distrust your managers. It is because the system that requires documentation catches errors as reliably as it catches anything else, and errors in small businesses are almost always honest mistakes that compound quietly for months before someone notices. Basic fraud safeguards are not an accusation. They are an acknowledgement that a system with no controls is a system that relies entirely on the goodwill of every person who will ever touch the money. That is not a system, that is a wish. The back office does not run 14 times. It runs once, applied across 14. A single bookkeeper handles accounts receivable, accounts payable, and monthly reconciliation for the entire portfolio. Payroll runs through one processor. Business insurance is reviewed annually across all entities with a broker who knows the portfolio and finds the coverage that fits the actual risk profile rather than the default policy offered to single location service businesses. Scheduling software, where applicable, is standardized so that the learning curve for a new hire in one business is shorter because the tools are the same tools used in the others. This centralization is where the economics of a portfolio become real in a way that owning one business of the same type never could. The overhead that would consume the margin of any single small business is distributed across all of them. Each business is carrying a fraction of the cost it would carry alone. The margin that centralizing produces is not dramatic on any single income statement. Across all 14, it is the difference between a business and a portfolio. The cadence that makes this compatible with a regular job is not an accident. It is designed. Monday evening is 15 minutes of email flagged by the bookkeeper. Tuesday morning is the scorecard review. 1 hour, all 14, because most of them take 4 minutes, and the one that takes 15 minutes is the one that needs the 15 minutes. Friday afternoon is the standing call with the operations manager, who holds the most cross-portfolio visibility. Monthly, there is a 2-hour financial review. Actual figures against plan. Receivables aging. Any account that moved into a concerning pattern. Once per quarter, you revisit the debt paydown schedule. Once per year, you evaluate whether any business in the portfolio should be sold, expanded, or left exactly as it is. The failure modes in small acquisitions are not exotic. They are predictable. The most common is overestimating your available time in the first 18 months. You modeled 10 hours a week. The business needed 22, and the gap was covered by borrowing from sleep and from the job and from the weekend that was supposed to be the weekend. The second most common is underestimating how much of the operation lives inside one person who is not you. The process is not written down because it was never necessary to write it down before you bought the business. Now it is necessary. Now you write it down. You do this before the person leaves, not after. The income arrives in layers. Distributions from operations are the largest layer. Debt paydown on the acquisition loans is a second form of return that does not arrive as cash but arrives as equity, as ownership that is being purchased by the business's own earnings rather than by your labor. Reinvestment rules are simple. Any business that produces above its target margin funds its own growth first, then contributes to the reserve fund, then distributes. Any acquisition that is underperforming its model retains cash instead of distributing it until the performance resolves. The money is not complicated. The discipline around the money is where most owners quietly fail, and where this one, the one who still packs lunch and parks in the fourth row, has chosen not to. You do not need 14 businesses to start. You need one industry you are willing to understand at the unit level before you spend a dollar. Pick the niche first. Not the one that sounds impressive. The one that has recurring revenue, low consumer cyclicality, and a reason for the customer to stay. Pest control, commercial cleaning, HVAC maintenance contracts, pool service, small format storage. These are not exciting words. They are not supposed to be. The criterion is not excitement. The criterion is whether the revenue comes back next month without a new sales cycle. Once you have identified the category, you learn the unit economics before you meet a single owner. What does a route cost to service? What is the average customer lifetime? What does retention look like at a healthy operator versus a struggling one? What does a technician cost to replace? You are not looking for insider information. You are building a vocabulary so that when an owner tells you the business runs itself, you know which question to ask next. Find 20 targets before you make an offer on one. This is not a negotiation tactic, it is calibration. You cannot know what a fair business looks like until you have seen what an unfair one looks like beside it. Brokers are one source. Business brokers who specialize in Main Street transactions, not investment banks, not the firms that handle 8-figure deals. They have listings. Some of the listings are priced correctly. Some are priced by an owner who has been running the business for 22 years and has attached a number to the years rather than to the cash flow. You learn to tell the difference. Local networks are a second source. Chambers of commerce, trade associations, the supplier who services 40 competitors in your target category and knows which owners are thinking about retirement. Suppliers are underutilized. They want the business to transfer to a capable operator because their revenue depends on it. Direct outreach is a third source and often the best one. A letter, not an email. 1 page. You explain that you are a serious buyer looking for a specific type of business in a specific geography and that you are not a competitor and not a broker. Some letters go unanswered. Some of them start conversations that turn into deals 18 months later. The owners who were not ready last year are sometimes ready this year. You stay in the conversation. The financing logic for small acquisitions is simpler than people make it. SBA-backed debt structures exist specifically for this category of transaction. You are not inventing a creative deal. You are using a mechanism that was designed for exactly this purpose. The business's own cash flow services the debt. You are not writing a check out of personal savings to cover the loan payment. The loan payment comes from operations. Seller financing is common in these transactions and is often a sign of a confident seller rather than a desperate one. An owner who carries a note for 15 to 20% of the purchase price is an owner who believes the business will continue to perform after the transfer. Earnouts, where a portion of the purchase price is contingent on the business hitting defined metrics in the years after closing, are not a red flag. They are an alignment tool. They mean the seller has skin in your success. You structure them with clear definitions so that the metric is not subject to interpretation after the fact. The diligence checklist is not long, but it is uncompromising. Customer retention proof. Not the owner's characterization of retention. Actual account records by month for the last 3 years. If customers are leaving at a rate higher than they are arriving, the revenue trend will not recover because you bought it. Labor realities. Who is doing what and what happens if they leave? Every business has a person who knows something that is not written down. Your job before closing is to find that person and document what they know. Equipment condition. An independent inspection, not the owner's word, not the asking price's implied assumption that everything works. Contract terms. Are customer relationships on contracts or on handshakes? A route business with signed service agreements is a different asset than a route business with customers who could leave the following Tuesday with no consequence. The difference shows up in the valuation, and it should show up in your offer price. The first 90 days after closing are not for changing things. They are for learning what is actually true versus what the diligence documents suggested was true. You stabilize before you optimize. You meet every key employee in the first 2 weeks. Not to announce yourself as the new owner in a way that creates anxiety. To listen. To ask what is working and what has been frustrating and what they would fix if anyone had asked. Some of the best operational improvements you will ever make come from people who knew the answer for years and were never asked. You implement the scorecard immediately. 4 metrics per week. You are not managing yet. You are measuring. You do not add new services, new territories, or new marketing initiatives until the first business runs on metrics rather than on your attention. That sentence is the entire expansion rule. You add the second business when the first one sends you a Tuesday scorecard and you read it in 7 minutes and nothing requires a call. You add the third when the second earns that same Tuesday. This is not a slow strategy. It is the only strategy that compounds without collapsing. Here is the action this week, not next quarter, not after the next raise, not when the timing is better. Pick one boring industry. Name it. Find 5 businesses in your geography that operate in that industry. Look them up. Identify the owner if you can. Write down 3 questions you would ask if you had 20 minutes with that person. That list is the beginning of the portfolio, not the purchase. Not the financing, not the negotiation, the conversation that only starts when you decide that a boring business owned quietly is worth understanding and that understanding is worth starting now.